Thunderbolts marks the final movie of Phase 5 in the MCU, and with Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and Secret Wars to look forward to, today I want to look back at the second phase in the multiverse saga and rank every single movie from the worst to the best. The tiers we have today are bad, meh, good, great, and best of the best. We're going to be going in release order, so starting off with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. This one's going to go in meh. Honestly, when the film first came out, I thought it was overhated. You know, I thought it could go at the very bottom of good, teetering the line between meh and good. Originally, I think I gave it a 7 upon rewatch, probably like a 6.5, 6. It's more so now gone to like a 5.5. I feel like this movie felt so important initially, but nowadays you look back at this movie and it feels like it fumbled every single aspect possible. Kang is pretty underwhelming. The quantum realm aspect of it is also super underwhelming. I don't think every aspect is bad. I think Jonathan Majors' performance itself is absolutely awesome. I mean, shitty guy aside, he puts on an absolute clinic here. I think Paul Rudd is doing everything that he does as Ant-Man at the same exact level, but I think every other aspect pretty much falls flat. I will never defend this movie on a visual level, but I think they did the best they could with MODOK. But again, other than that, this movie just is, it's kind of underwhelming in every single aspect, and I was one of the guys going in that was very, very excited for it. Next up, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and this one is going to go in best of the best. With a little bit of a caveat, I think this is easily one of the best films of the phase, but I think overall in the MCU, it would definitely be in the top, like, 15 to 20% of the films, but I'm not going to say it's like a top 5 or top 10 specifically, but this is the perfect cap off to the Guardians trilogy. James Gunn's final outing in the MCU. It's absolutely awesome in that regard as well. I just think visually there are a couple of problems, but it feels like James Gunn is definitely taking a little bit of a progressive swing here when it comes to the visuals in the MCU in terms of how the action is executed. I also really like that this is strictly just a space story, and there's another movie that takes place in a lot of space situations as well that we'll talk about next year, but nothing ever reaches the world building and just levels that Guardians gets to. Character arcs I think are all great here. Star-Lord is obviously at the forefront, and so is Rocket. I think Star-Lord is just the most interesting because we know that Chris Pratt will probably make multiple returns to the MCU, but I don't really know / care for the rest of the Guardians at this point in time in terms of where they're going to be in the future of the MCU. Maybe it's because we know that James Gunn isn't coming back, so maybe that priority isn't really there. But I don't know. I feel like this story wrapped up, and now I'm kind of sitting with the fact that, you know, I don't really need the Guardians again. But this works phenomenally as a Rocket exploration. Going in, we kind of knew what the story would be, but I think James Gunn still surprised us in terms of the story structure, which I think is one of the best parts of the film. Next up, we have the Marvels, and this one is also gonna go in meh. Probably, actually, I might actually have to put this in bad. I'm gonna put this in bad, actually. Yeah, I never want to be too much of a hater on the Marvels just because I feel like people overhate it in general. I think this is better than Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel based film. And I think it's just because the supporting characters are interesting, Monica Rambeau and Kamala Khan. And I love Kamala Khan. I actually really, really liked Miss Marvel, and I think it's one of the better Marvel Disney Plus TV shows. And I think notably in Phase 5, there is one really great season of television, which is Loki Season 2, one of my favorite seasons of TV ever. But in general, it was pretty lackluster, at least compared to the prior phase in terms of TV shows. So I didn't really want to include them here. I just wanted to rank films. But nevertheless, getting back to the Marvels, I think the Marvels was interesting conceptually, but I couldn't tell you the villain off the top of my head, and I could tell you most MCU villains. And secondly, I just felt like the story was so uninteresting. I thought the third act worked just well enough, but this is the first time I think I've ever seen a Marvel movie in theaters, not on opening weekend, and with absolute no story urgency. Like, as much as you want to say Marvel is kind of losing the overall story consistency, and I talked more about that in my Thunderbolts video, even if Deadpool and Wolverine or Captain America Brave New World aren't one-for-one story connecting to the overall bigger MCU, I was still interested in them because of that potential. With the Marvels, none of that was there, even though Monica does travel to this alternate universe and she sees like a beast and the X-Men theme song plays, like everyone got excited over that. None of that stuff really mattered to me. This movie just felt so unimportant. I didn't really need it. And honestly, I think it just proves that Captain Marvel works much better in other films as a side character that is insanely powerful, because I really like the fact that she's so nonchalant, she's more powerful than everyone else, and she just whoops ass. Next up on the list, though, is Deadpool and Wolverine, and I'm gonna put this at the very top of great. Now, I do think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is better, and I do think Deadpool and Wolverine works in its own right, but I still think Deadpool and Wolverine is basically like an 8.5 out of 10. I'd say Guardians is like a 9. So they are very, very close. I'm just trying to differentiate them in some way using the tiers. Deadpool and Wolverine, for me, works very, very well, even outside of the cameos, which I personally wouldn't even consider them cameos. Like, if they were just random fan cast characters like what Channing Tatum's Gambit was, I don't think people would consider them cameos either, but they do use old Fox X-Men characters, which I talked about this in my Thunderbolts video again, but I'm very, very confused as to why they're bringing back old X-Men characters if they're gonna be doing a mutant saga down the line. And since they already brought them back in Deadpool and Wolverine, I really don't know what's going on, but I don't want to get into it here. I think this is a great Deadpool return. I still think the first Deadpool movie just hits the spot for me, because I think the second one also has that problem of getting a little bit too big in the IP of things, and I don't think that makes it bad. I still love Deadpool 2 and Deadpool 3, but I think there's something different that these movies aim to do, especially opposed to the first film. I do think this one works on a very personal level. I think it balances the whole Deadpool and Wolverine idea and it being a cool comic thing and bringing together all of these IP pieces while also being a pretty cool, like, I am X-Men study of what Wolverine is. You know, this core of X-Men characters that feels like he's lost a piece of himself when his universe's X-Men has died. I think every story catalyst is also really, really interesting. I don't know. It feels like the perfect multiversal story on a bigger multiversal level. Like, I absolutely love Multiverse of Madness, which again I talked about in my last video, but I think that uses the multiverse in a personal, more character study way of Doctor Strange, whereas this uses it as more of a what the is possible in the multiverse, let's find out, with Deadpool and Wolverine traveling it. So I think two multiverse stories served in two different purposes. I think this is why you have movies like this in the MCU. You can explore a bunch of different things. Next up, we have Captain America: Brave New World. This was gonna go at the top of meh. When I originally saw this film, I think I gave it like a 7.5 to 8, but I'm really, as I'm sitting with it more, it just feels more and more uninteresting to me. You know, I think it works as a contained spy story, but a lot of the presidential stuff doesn't really work for me. The commentary is very diluted. Sadly, it's just Winter Soldier, but like dialed back a little bit. It's not doing something more. So when you have a movie that's doing the same exact things, but a little bit better in your same universe, it obviously raises some red flags. But I think it takes a really interesting exploration into Sam Wilson's Captain America, this conversation about taking the super soldier serum. I personally wish it was just a little bit more connected to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I understand why they wouldn't want to do that. And I also know Bucky and John Walker were in Thunderbolts, and there was other things for their characters to do, leading them into Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars and stuff like that. But at the same time, I think those are pretty important characters to Sam Wilson's, I guess, upbringing / transformation into Captain America. And that was all kind of thrown out the window. There was a little bit of a time jump. I didn't mind all of that, but I really enjoyed how those characters were explored earlier in Sam Wilson's story, so I would have loved to see that continue. But I thought Bucky's cameo was also phenomenal, and it really played into the story well enough. I don't know, I think there's a lot of pros and cons here, but I kind of just settle at meh. But it is closer to the good tier than it is like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. But finally, the newest and final film in Phase 5 of the MCU, Thunderbolts. This one is going at the very top of best of the best. I genuinely do think this is where Marvel has finally kind of hit a stride. Now, we'll see in Phase 6 / the end of the multiverse saga if it was a little bit too late, but I still do think it works perfectly for what it's trying to do. I don't want to complain too much about the overall story just yet, and I won't get into spoilers here. I'll have a full spoiler review coming out soon about the movie, but I absolutely love all of the character work. I think Yelena is the perfect protagonist, and I think her ties to Black Widow inherently make her a more emotionally resonant character to fans of the larger MCU, and that instantly makes us fall in love with her character together, like we obviously did in Black Widow, but then it also adds a lot of heart to all the other characters. I think the way that all the characters are tied together is done really well. In my opinion, it's a lot more seamless than something like the Suicide Squad, but I still think it all works the same. I think it uses the idea of Marvel's Suicide Squad in a much more interesting way than you'd think that premise would be. And I think The Void is just absolutely the perfect concept. It is a story catalyst, and I think Century is the perfect story catalyst slash overall villain of the film to really explore these characters. And I think this is just one of the most creative MCU scripts, one of the most serious and important MCU scripts. I genuinely just think everything about this movie is executed to perfection, except for one very small thing, which is the pacing. I think the story structure is just a little bit flawed, but I think that's inherently going to happen when you have a lot of different characters in a lot of different positions, and you're also introducing a lot, and I think tying together a lot of post-Endgame things. I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review, but this type of movie is exactly what the MCU needed post-Endgame. But when I say post-Endgame, not 5 years after Endgame, I'm saying like right after Endgame. Having these courtroom sequences where we have characters saying we have no heroes, we have no unity, no one is coming to save us. That's the kind of questions the MCU should have been pondering upon. And I think they do that to an extent with Eternals and like, who are our saviors gonna be? But that was in a very, very grand existential extent. This is on the more personal, like literally New York City going into the void kind of situation, which I think just works much better for people that are, I guess, more so complaining that the MCU feels directionless and there's not a glue holding it together. Obviously, if you've seen the film, you know that the post-credit scene ties a lot of interesting things together, leads us into Doomsday, but I won't get into that here. There will be a whole other video talking about that. Now, the reason I put this above Volume 3, and I've only seen Thunderbolts one time, I've seen Volume 3 about 2 to 3 times. I do put this above it just because I think even as an introductory thing, as like the Thunderbolts and this new team in the MCU, I think it works a little bit better than James Gunn's wrap-up of a team, but it's also very difficult comparison, so I'll probably flip-flop between the two. Both are absolutely amazing movies. But that wraps up my ranking for Phase 5 of the MCU. I would love to know in the comments down below not only your ranking for Phase 5 of the MCU, but also what MCU ranking videos would you guys like to see after Fantastic Four. The one on the top of my mind is just a ranking of every single Marvel Studios MCU film, just because we're not getting another one after Fantastic Four for about 10 to 12 months. But again, that wraps up all my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.